and good afternoon. My name is Sundarine Kasser, and I welcome you to the Institute of Regional Studies. We will start today with a recitation of a few verses from the Holy Quran.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful. وجعلنا في الأرض رواسي أن تميد بهم وجعلنا فيها فجاجا سبلا لعلهم يهتدون. And we placed within the earth firmly set mountains, lest it should shift with them, and we made the mountain passes as roads that they might be guided. وجعلنا السماء سقفا محفوظا ومن آياتنا and we made the sky a protected ceiling, the rain from its signs are turning away.
Jazakallah. Today's event, Climate Finance Towards Securing Sustainable Resilience in Pakistan, is organized by the Strengthening Regional Climate Resilience Program at the IRS, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's proceedings. The agenda today is as follows. We will begin with a presentation from Transparency International, followed by a rich panel discussion and Q&A session. Then there will also be time for a networking tea at the end. As we continue to face the challenges posed by climate change, the importance of mobilizing and effectively utilizing climate finance is at the forefront of this issue. Particularly with COP29 coming up later this year, it is of utmost importance that we take this point in time to take stock of global and domestic fiscal priorities with regards to climate action. So we are very fortunate today to be joined by some very distinguished panelists and discussants as well to really help us navigate the questions and technicalities around this topic. So to start us off, I will invite our keynote presenter, Mr. Hamid Butt. He is a GRI certified sustainability professional, and he is trained as a policy consultant with over 8 years of experience in environmental policy, sustainability, and ESG. Mr. Hamid will be presenting a report which he co-authored entitled Financing Climate Action, Enhancing Effectiveness in Pakistan's Climate Governance Frameworks. It was published by Transparency International earlier in March. And this report is really seminal in the way that it lays out the state of climate finance in Pakistan with a real clarity. And it is truly a wonderful resource. So I will hand it over to him to present his findings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I would just get into my presentation. Am I audible to everyone? Okay, so let me just put up. I would require the organizers to, if they can enable the screen sharing option for me as well, or if it's appropriate, maybe just switch to the presentation at the event end as well.
The screen share is on. You can share the slides. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me just begin with so I'll briefly introduce how this report came about, and then I would want to get into the details of it. So Transparency International is developing a huge resource, and it has been called the Climate Governance Integrity Project, which is looking at 25 developing countries and how they are processing the climate finance budgets that they're receiving. So in most cases that what we are seeing around the world is that there is a demand for climate finance, which is natural given that a lot of the NDCs cannot be achieved without relevant climate finance availability. But at the same time, there isn't enough guidance or understanding within governments on how to improve the climate finance inflows into their countries. So this is what the report tried to look at, and this is a collaborative sort of report between Climate Finance Pakistan and Transparency International. And one of the things that we wanted to begin by is highlighting Pakistan's key wins, because this is very important. This is a learning that we have had over the past couple of COP summits, that since COP26, COP27, COP28, other countries which come to the climate conferences usually showcase their big wins. And I'm talking about both middle income countries like Pakistan, big countries, regional peers, Pakistan. All of these countries come up with a very strong pitch on how they should be the ones receiving finance. On our side, this pitch is a little weak. We are unable to showcase our wins so far. One of the examples is the 10 billion tree tsunami. While this project has been happening for the past nearly a decade, we're unable to quantify and showcase the climate benefit that we've received out of it. And this is very important to do because this was registered as a RED initiative project. Similarly, other afforestation projects that are popping up in Pakistan, such as the Green Pakistan Initiative, the Blue Sindh Blue Carbon Project, these projects require, really, really quantifiable benefits so we can show the world that this is what we're doing. Similarly, Living Indus initiative, which was launched this past COP28, this is going to improve a lot of the outcomes regarding our groundwater and overall precipitation sort of planning. So we need to understand that we need to take this abroad and showcase that these projects are being developed. These that have these climate benefits, and this is where we will be directing our climate finance. Now, within Pakistan, we know that a few sectors have really boomed and really taken on the role of climate benefits, which is solar. Solar is, it's been really, really adopted at the consumer level. The estimates so far suggest that nearly, 3,000 megawatt capacity in net metering and solar and off-grid initiatives have already been put up. So when we say renewable sources, we often do not report these sources, but we need to, because distributed solar is a very climate-friendly solution, and we continue to see that this will be expanded, even though the government is tinkering with the policy here and there. The benefit still will be very great, and people will continue expanding. Industries will continue expanding. Our textile industry has become very, very, cognizant of why sustainability is important in terms of its export markets. So textile has been investing a lot in renewable energy, clean water, water reuse, and energy efficiency, and reducing their chemical use as well. And lastly, you have the transport and EV sector is just about taking root in Pakistan. We have very small scale setups that have been come in place, but we see that in the next 5 years, the sector will really boom. So these are areas where we see that we have bankable projects in place, and perhaps this is what we should be showcasing when we go abroad. One of the things that we then, when we started looking at the government public sector side, we realized that there are some silos, and by silos, we mean that at the federal level, at the provincial level, and in terms of overall transparency, there are some gaps that really need to be fixed. So, and climate finance, as we know, is currently an intersectoral subject. Ministry for Finance handles the money, Planning Commission approves the projects that will be receiving finances, MOCC sets the planning and priorities of where those projects should be coming about. Economic Affairs Division, of course, approves some of the financing coming in. It also monitors that financing. So there is this, it's a multifactorial subject. And right now, climate finance units or climate finance focal points have been adopted and in each of these spheres. So there should be some sort of interministerial coordination at the federal level on how to make sure that this really accelerates, or if the duplication of work is minimal and each ministry really focuses on what the task it should be doing. At the same level, at the provincial level, this understanding is even weaker. When we looked at Punjab, a lot of the climate planning and budgeting has happened in the PND Punjab. When we looked at KP, the planning and development is happening in Forests Department. Similarly, when we look at Sindh, it's happening at the Coastal Department level or the Chief Secretary's office. So this is again an issue where the money can go. When a donor comes up with a certain quantum of money, they want to drive it into projects, but they do not know where is the exact office they should be talking to, which is the person who holds the most sort of responsibility and authority in driving and aligning the finance. So we really need to, the federal government has already taken a lead, but the provincial governments really need to, move ahead now and define who is the right climate authority within these provincial governments. And then accountability is something that we have struggled with in terms of other sectors as well. And this is where climate finance cannot lag because the money is mostly coming from international donors. And this means that the accountability requirements are much more stringent. There is a limited amount of money, even though it might be $100 billion, it might be $500 billion internationally, but donors will want to put the money which is most transparently handled. So accountability was another angle that we looked into. When we talk about why we need a lot of this money, so we've had the big floods of 2022, but besides that, we have other impacts. The World Bank's post-disaster needs assessment after the floods showed that there, in terms of just loss and damage, it's greater than $30 billion, but also during even without the disasters, we have considerable impacts. Those impacts come from pollution. Impacts come from heat waves, droughts, famine. So it's a multiple things, and we even in terms of non-disaster years have billions of dollars in losses. So this is why we need the money. At the same time, we have our nationally determined contributions (NDCs), which Pakistan submitted as part of its revision in 2021 after the COP26. And we sort of committed that we will have green transport, which means all new vehicle sales, among them 30% will be electric. Emissions mitigation, we sort of devise strategies where we'll be reducing 50% increase in GHG emissions by using a low carbon trajectory. And then in energy transition, we also committed a 60% shift to all renewable sources. All of these things require a lot of money. So that money has to be coming from international sources, and to receive it, again, we have to really chart it out in terms of our policy dynamics and how climate governance can be improved. In Pakistan, the climate governance sort of has this two-pronged sort of development. We know that government is creating policies and plans and legislation, but at the same time, we know that our courts have been driving a lot of this conversation as well. And this came about, initially in the late 90s when the EPA Act came, but at the same time, we've had the recent litigation around the Climate Change Authority, where the Supreme Court has also ordered the federal government just last week to establish the Climate Change Authority. So this is sort of there is a incentive for the government to be creating these policies for receiving climate finance, but also there's a push from the court's end to drive a lot of these policy changes. And in this does not happen in many countries. This is very unique to Pakistan, how other institutions or how other agencies are playing certain climate roles as well. But at the same time, because policy action in Pakistan is somewhat slow, it can be seen as a dynamic that is catalyzing more action. Problems is, as we've mentioned, that there are problems and we have in somewhat slow. The problems highlighted here, and this report was also presented to the Supreme Court before it gave its order as well. One of our findings was presented that the Climate Change Authority has not been active. And because it has not been active, we don't have the Pakistan Climate Change Fund, which was supposed to be set up under this authority. So this gap remains, and right now, court has trying to force the government to build it. Once the fund is active, it also needs to consolidate other, funds that are already present. So somewhat of centralization in terms of money receiving needs to happen, and then it can be sort of devolved to the provinces adequately. Transparency is going to be very important. The Climate Change Authority under current legislation is sort of free from any accountability. We really need to ensure that such legislation includes transparency rather than removing it. So the donors can see it as a viable option to put their money in. So this section 14 probably needs to be amended in the future, or it might create legislative issues or legal issues. And of course, the Climate Change Council, which since the establishment of Council in 2017, was not called till 2022 when the floods happened. And now we see that in after every 6 months a meeting takes place to approve certain policy matters, but it needs to be convened more consistently. It has to be a schedule where it reviews progress, sets agenda for the coming 6 months, and continuously streamlines its operations, including the climate change authorities and the funds. And at the provincial level, Punjab still does not have a new, approved climate change policy or an action plan. It's in a draft stage. Some of it is already being adopted through other means, but policy really needs to and plan really needs to be approved. KP approved it in 2022, and it also has an action plan. It creates this list of interventions that it wants to put in place in the action plan, but the province does not have money. So it's looking for climate finance to get these interventions in place. Sindh has a policy, but it does not have an action plan. This is sort of, a confusion why it did not create an action plan, because the dynamic is that you have a policy and an action plan. Currently, they're also being sort of encouraged to develop a plan that includes all the sector level interventions they want to put in place. One thing that Sindh stands out is that Sindh is the only province where we have already a carbon credit project, and it has been listed since 2016 by a private player, and it is listed in a Singapore-based climate impact exchange, where the carbon credits are also traded. So there is this, whole example where carbon credit market was accessed, it generates revenue. As a part of that revenue also goes to the same environmental coastal department. But of course, we need the government to really, create the policy that drives more projects, particularly in mangroves, because there's more space in developing mangroves. Balochistan as yet does not have a policy. It had significant damages in the 22 floods, which means that it really needs to improve. And at the provincial government level, a lot of again handling happens at the chief secretary's office or the PND Balochistan, but it really needs to approve a plan now which drives the project level development in Balochistan. The climate finance needs that we currently know about or have assessed is that if we want to achieve the NDCs and improve, take up renewable energy, we really need to generate up to $50 billion. At the same time, if you include all of the transition needs, that is more than $100 billion that Pakistan requires by 2030. That is not happening. The World Bank even estimates an even higher number. It says that uh, Pakistan requires at least $60 billion every year till 2030, which goes up to nearly $400 billion. We do not have access to that kind of money. The money that we've assessed so far, and these are the numbers that we've gotten. Pakistan gets a lot of money from three bilateral partners. The UK, Japan, and Germany have been leading a lot of the donations that come to Pakistan, and they combine sort of have the two-third part of all bilateral funding that has come into Pakistan. And even right now, the UK and Germany is driving a lot of finance into Japan. Might in the coming years might be holding down because they have their own transition needs as well. But again, these are our bilateral partners. But at the same time, the MDBs, which is the World Bank and ADB and some other sources like the Green Environment Facility and Green Climate Fund, have been funding a lot of projects. Post floods, World Bank has introduced a couple of new projects which have increased the quantum from their financing to more than $2 billion per year. At the same time, Green Climate Fund has improved a couple of projects. Acumen Climate Action Fund was, for example, improved just this March. And other projects such as the Green BRT is being implemented. So these projects are in some form already approved, but not completely implemented. And there is still room for Pakistan to be accessing more finance if it develops the right kind of policies, plans, and governance framework that can receive more finance. Now, this is where we come in, highlighting some of the discrepancies in climate finance. Pakistan's climate change division has reports its expenditure every year, and a lot of it is consumed in office work in the climate change secretariat. And then you have other small agencies attached to the climate change division, which also receive certain funding. In terms of development, so we have one of the big projects that we have is a Green Pakistan program, under which the 10 billion tree tsunami came. At the same time, it also has other projects within it. If you look at the development budget, The development budget for Green Pakistan program is, in terms of other development projects, nearly 10 or more times, larger, sorry, 100 times larger than what other allocations have happened. In recent years, because of Pakistan's fiscal constraints, that has been reduced a little bit, but we still have a lot of money in that program, and we should be really scaling it up and looking at ways to earn carbon credits, use it as a marketing pitch when we go and pitch for other funding as well. So this is very important. But at the same time, this is a discrepancy that we noted that uh, well, Pakistan has fiscal constraints. It reduces a lot of allocation in the development projects, such as you can see, the light shade here is what actually was given, and then the dark shade was sort of what you was in the budget, but you also reduced it. At the same time, in the operational expenditure, we see no such reductions happen. So when Pakistan is trying to save money in fiscal space, it usually cuts down development projects. And in terms of climate change division, those development projects, as pointed out here, are very important in terms of climate resilience and carbon credits and carbon, offset generating. So we should try to see where other cuts can be made rather than targeting these climate-friendly projects. In terms of, at the provincial level, the situation is sort of not very well because in terms of the entire budget outlays, Punjab is allocating below 1% to climate and environment, and KP is allocating below 0.5% in its annual budget to climate and environment. And the situation is very similar in Sindh as well. And Balochistan, of course, has no allocation at all. It's generally working on project to project level. So provinces really need to step up now to be creating areas and avenues where project climate finance can be given. This is where the money handling happens. Of course, people who interacted with economic and budgeting already understand this, but this is how climate budgeting also happens. We have authorization of the budgets at the assembly level. Public accounts committees, obviously, they really account for whatever is happening in the past year. The Finance Commission, National Finance Commission, so far does not have a climate portion, but there's a suggestion that climate angle could be put in the National Finance Commission based on a province's or subnational region's vulnerability. For example, Balochistan and KP have a higher vulnerability than Punjab, so maybe they might be needed for a separate finance commission linkage to that. At the same time, it could be that the provincial finance commissions also target it to districts and divisions that are more vulnerable. For example, in our case, when we talk about Sindh, there are certain districts of Sindh which are prone to riverine flooding and droughts as well. So the provincial finance commission award might need to be also sort of rebranded this way. And of course, at the accountability level, we have our federal ombudsman, the National Accountability Bureau, and the provincial ombudsman and anti-corruption establishments, which also need to have this understanding of climate as well. Right now, in our accountability bodies, there is very limited understanding of climate finance accountability, or if we can link accountability climate finance benefits, because there's no expertise of climate professionals within these accountability bodies. We also looked at what is happening at the international level and how they're handling it. The best practices that we're showing right now are from three European countries. They've developed the climate sort of their climate governance integrity based on these four things. They set up a strategic framework, and the strategic framework then guides whatever they're doing in terms of looking at individual projects. To look at individual projects, you also need interministerial enabling environmental capacity development, such as anyone who is looking to hold the project accountable needs to understand the climate dynamics of it. As pointed out, our accountability bodies do not have that. And once accountability takes place, the strategic framework is realigned. So this is what the UK, Germany, and France are doing. And we looked at these countries because Germany is, for example, a federal republic which has devolved a lot of its government. UK is one of our primary donors, and a lot of our law comes from common law. And France, of course, is one of the strongest climate at a country level, one of the strongest climate players. So these are good learnings. And they do this by these couple of set of tools. We also, identify tools that there's CPEIR, which is a diagnostic tool that a World Bank developed, and it at the EFM Institute level, this is where they come in and mainstream climate change. Then there's a climate change budget integration index, which looks at existing PFM system and sort of ranks it that where a climate is included or not. And within climate, it also looks at gender and social inclusion because gender is a very big angle in terms of climate resilience development, and Pakistan still lags a lot on gender mainstreaming. This is the IMF tool. So IMF also has a management tool. It has recently adapted this public investment management tool to climate, including certain risks associated with climate, such as damage to infrastructure, damage to government assets, loss and damage that we've already discussed. So it includes all of that in its assessment tool. At the same time, we have examples of other things that we can we do. This is already happening in Bangladesh, for example. Bangladesh right now, when it produces its annual budget, it also presents this separate document which is titled Climate Financing for Sustainable Development. So this is a separate budget where it reports all of the climate spending it has done. And it comes as a separate booklet that is presented to both the parliament and is publicly available. And the benefit of this booklet is all the donors can also see where the country is driving its climate investments. So it could be something that Pakistan can also take up that beyond our annual budget statement, we also produce, maybe MOCC produces, maybe the Ministry of Finance, produces this, that a document which just tracks sustainable development budget. So this would be very useful. And one of the steps that is very sort of under explored right now is climate procurement. So procurement is again a very strictly managed subject in Pakistan under the PEPRA rules. And this is why we sort of looked at this in detail from a transparency angle, that certain procurements, especially for climate finance projects, need to be very open. We saw issues in certain projects where financing could have been drastically low for certain project items, such as, vehicles, stationery, because there was a lot of wastage. So we need to create a procurement angle that reduces this wastage, reduces the money wasted on it. We also produce less amount of pollution when we're implementing a project. Large projects often lead to a lot of wastage. We have to reduce that. Project life cycles, sort of example, we have a lot of when a project unit is set up to implement on ground, it has its own furniture, its own building, all of that will have to be sort of accounted for because a donor wants to minimize these operational costs and then maximize the benefits of adaptation or mitigation that are coming out of the project. And then, of course, this is something that the Transparent International team in Pakistan had already done. Integrity pacts were something that they implemented in Sindh, and the Integrity Pact was able to save millions of rupees over the project's life cycle. So this is something that we are suggesting again, that to showcase projects transparency internationally, an integrity pact can be made between a project, a ministry, and the transparency team, where it comes and monitors those flows. I, for example, work for Climate Finance Pakistan. We also help the institutional side to really make sure the climate finance side is clean and transparent. So this is one of the suggestions that has already been done in Pakistan. It resulted in certain money saving as well. And of course, it results in international best practices case that you have a third party also taking into account the sort of spending that you're doing. So right now, the one of the things that we really need to look into is PEPRA Rule 7. This was highlighted in our report that contract which is procuring agency has to make all documents public. So this does not happen in most cases in Pakistan. For example, PC2 documents do not come into public. PC3, PC4, PC5 also does not come into public. And along with that, the procurement documentation often does not come public. This, of course, cannot be done in climate finance projects. We really need to make sure all our spending and decisions are in public. We need to put in a whistleblower mechanism where wastage can be reduced. And of course, national tracking of climate finance should be done at the ministerial and provincial levels. So the governments also can track any anomalous budget spending, such as any misuse or misappropriation at the project level. so the relevant ministry or department can tackle that effectively. And as mentioned, the green budget statement is what Bangladesh is doing, and this is something that we should try to adapt very soon in the coming years as well. This is a scoring checklist that is available in the report as well. It generally what it does is it tries to include climate, such as what we sort of presented in the previous slides, that it tries to include project at the institutional and project development and project monitoring stage at every level basically, so that the donor which is driving climate finance into a project knows that this project is robust, it does not have wastage, it is very accountable, it is transparent, and of course, then it increases the quantum that they might be willing to give Pakistan in the coming years. So this is what the report sort of has. It is available on our website. The recommendations are that Climate Change Act, the institutions that are sort of supposed to be built, it really needs to happen. The Supreme Court has now ordered this to happen as well. And we need to, in climate planning, we need to have a whole of society approach. Whenever a project is being developed, the stakeholder participation, the public participation is very important, especially if it's implemented at a large scale infrastructure project in certain nature spots or biodiversity areas. Then transparency is something that we reported on how it can be done at the planning and budgeting level. Key auditing and accountability institutions need to have climate expertise in-house, such as NAB or your anti-corruption establishments or public accounts committee. These institutions are very key to climate finance security. So this is where we need to include climate expertise. One of the ways is that when the Public Accounts Committee is reviewing the climate, it's reporting the auditing reports, it might be useful to have climate change council members or climate change authority members as part of those discussions which can also address the climate angle of accountability plan. Is there a wastage? Is there a climate benefit that outweighs certain wastage? So we need to be accounting for all of those things. And at the same time, then PEPRA rules, as we've highlighted, we've also sort of recommended that an open database of climate finance should be established. This is something that we are internally also developing on for our own use, but at the government level, this would be one of the best practices it can implement. And of course, we need to have mechanisms where corruption and transparency can be reported and transparency can be ensured, such as whistleblower protection and mechanisms that like green budget statements, which reported very publicly. So this is about it, and this is what we reported in our major report. It's present on our websites, both on transparency and climate finance websites. And there's both a detailed version and a summarized version. So those are available. And that's it for my presentation. We can wind it up now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that comprehensive presentation and setting the stage for us. Could I just make a small request to the audience if you could please keep your phones on silent so that we can avoid any disruptions going forward. So now I will introduce you to our panel. First up, we have our session chair, the Honorable Romina Khurshid Alam, Coordinator to Prime Minister on Climate Change and Environmental Coordination. Previously, she was the convener of the Parliamentary Task Force on SDGs and Special Assistant to the Prime Minister in Political Coordination. She could not be with us here in person today due to a last-minute cabinet meeting, but we will be hearing from her in a video recording later. Next, we have Mr. Ali Tokir Sheikh, Advisor Climate Change to Planning Commission. Oops. Sorry. Next up, we have Mr. Ali Tokir Sheikh, Advisor Climate Change to the Planning Commission. He is a member of the newly created Loss and Damage Fund, where he chairs the Asia Pacific Group. He also serves on multiple boards and procedures committees of UNFCCC. He is also a member of the Committee to Review Climate Change Governance and Mechanisms to Access Loss and Damage Funds, which was recently constituted by the Prime Minister. We also have with us Mr. Fawad Hayat, Head of Climate Change at NDRMF. Mr. Fawad holds an MBA with over 17 years of professional experience, including working with multinational organizations such as the World Bank, ADB, UNDP, and the Government of Pakistan. We are also joined virtually by Mr. Farooq Khan, a seasoned diplomat. Mr. Farooq has over 27 years of involvement in shaping global political and economic policies, and he has held various senior roles in government and global institutions. He led negotiations for launching SDGs at Rio. He co-chaired UNEP, the UNEP working group that established the World Environment Assembly. And he was a member of the international committee that designed the Green Climate Fund. Finally, the session will be moderated by Ms. Selina Irfan. Ms. Selina has over a decade's experience of working in the energy and climate change sector. She is a representative of Climate Change Consulting of VCMI's stakeholder for monitoring, regulatory, and assessment framework of voluntary carbon markets. I request the panel to please join us on the stage. I think we'd like to start with hearing the chairperson's remarks, please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, honorable guests, esteemed delegates and distinguished participants, and Assalamu alaikum. I'm profoundly honored to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Institute of Regional Studies, IRS, for organizing this pivotal roundtable discussion on climate finance, focusing on the Pakistan's current situation and global priorities, particularly in anticipation of COP29. This forum serves as an invaluable platform for fostering dialogues and collaboration in our collective pursuit of sustainable resilience. As we convene here today, the imperative for action on climate change has never been more pressing. It is therefore heartening to see such a diverse of stakeholders come together to address this critical issue. Climate finance, when we talk about the climate finance, which stands as a pivotal point in our journey towards securing sustainable resilience in Pakistan, we must strive to convince bankable finance in the most cost-efficient manner, leveraging both public and private resources to maximize impact. Ladies and gentlemen, in this endeavor, the role of non-state technocrats cannot be overstated. Their expertise and insight are invaluable in designing bankable projects that not only address climate vulnerabilities, but also unlock economic opportunities for our communities. Furthermore, when we talk about climate diplomacy offers a powerful avenue for advancing our agenda on sustainable finance, Pakistan must actively engage with the global communities, leveraging diplomatic channels to advocate for our climate priorities and forge partnerships that enable greater access to finance. To enhance data management and information sharing, we can foster greater trust and collaboration in our pursuit of climate finance. Last year, we all know the COP28 closed with an agreement that signals the beginning of the end. When we talk about beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era and laid the ground for a swift, just an equitable transition through deep emissions cuts and scaled up finance. Pakistan's look forward to deepening its collaboration through public-private partnerships on climate-related issues, including capacity building, knowledge sharing, technology transfer, and of course, we strongly believe that through joint efforts and partnerships, we can achieve our shared goals of mitigating climate change, protecting the environment, and securing sustainable future for generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to this fruitful discussion and the complete outcomes that will emerge from today's deliberations. and we are going to follow them. So please, I'm looking forward and hope for the best. Look after yourself. Have a very good evening. Thank you.
In the saving of time, I would request Mr. Ali Tokishe to please, he has a presentation. We all, while we are setting up the presentation, I would also like to point out that he is my first boss, so it is an honor to be sharing this stage. I have everything I know, and my first training is from him.
दुनिया में फाइनेंस है कि नहीं है I think never in the history of the world there was so much finance available for any action as it is available today. About finance, much more than there's a lot of finance available, much more than we can handle or much more than the world can handle. Finance की कमी नहीं है. वैसे spring में flower and blossom हर तरफ होता है, इस तरह दुनिया में international system इस किस्म का finance बहुत ज्यादा है. The question is, are we able to see the opportunity? Are we trained to tame the opportunity, to seize the opportunity, to capture the opportunity? So the gap is not of finance, and the gap is not about our capacity or competence. The key question I want to raise is this question, whether or not we understand the nature of the beast. तो स्लाइड्स अगर सामने आ जाते हैं तो मैं स्पीड के साथ चल सकूंगा, अगर नहीं है तो मैं अपने फोन पे खोल लेता हूँ. पहली बात यह है, मेरी अकल के मुताबिक they're not trained to access international finance. First 50 or 60 years of our life, we were trained to get foreign assistance, where the donors will do the documentation and we would sign the dotted line. So the entrepreneurial spirit required to go and get international finance is not there in our system. It's absent. हम आज भी डेस्क के पीछे बैठे इंतजार कर रहे हैं कि कोई और बंदा प्रोजेक्ट बनाए, फंड सिक्योर करे, अपना जो कट और जो प्रायोरिटी उसमें डिफाइन करनी है वो करे, मेरे हिस्से के पैसे ला के मुझे टेबल के पीछे साइन करवा लो, वो मैं कर दूंगा. And that job, as the donors went, MDBs has filled that, multilateral development institutions. World Bank, IMF are very good at this. They do technical assistance, undertake technical studies, identify gaps, develop a project. They come to you and tell you, Mr. Minister or Mr. Secretary, this is what your country needs. And our country, of course, needs that. Whether or not that is our priority, we as a minister, as a secretary, as a concerned department or province, we are not always sure or do not always care, because there are two objectives or maybe three objectives at play. From multilateral, from multilateral development banks' point of view, they are in the business of selling finance. So they want to quickly sell you the finance a project. From the government's point of view, we are in the business of overcoming the financial deficit. तो हम कहते हैं बेशक जिस चीज को मर्जी से लाओ, हमारा चेक किधर है? We need finance today. We cannot wait till tomorrow. So we are willing to sign. So urgency on part of MDBs to sell projects, urgency on part of us to get the foreign exchange component. And people like you and me and other 120 million people who are struggling with climate vulnerability, that is not part of the equation. This is not on the table. They may or may not benefit us. And if it happens, it may be accidental. Now, let me see if I can see from here. 3-4 assumptions हैं दुनिया में जो climate discourse को dialogue को govern करने हैं. One position is taken by Pakistan and almost all developing countries. This is that you caused climate change. It's your responsibility. As if the justice governs the world. Those who come from foreign service know very well the principle of shared and differentiated responsibility was signed in 1992. It stays a principle, but it's not an implementation doctrine. It's not a fact. The world is not governed by it. This was 1992. Second is that the polluter pays the principle. We assumed because they were the polluters, they polluted the world, they've caused us harm, and they'll pay for it. But that principle is best implemented in domestic jurisdictions, within the United States, within EU, within Australia, within Canada. It is not replicable, it's not applicable or relevant for transboundary rights. So if your emission in China harms us in Pakistan, I cannot sue China. But a Chinese citizen, presumably, theoretically speaking, can sue their own government or a county. Third is, there's a lot of hype in this country about loss and damage fund. We had a similar hype about the Green Climate Fund. And prior to that, Adaptation Fund. And prior to that, JEF. Without necessarily knowing that how or why it could not be accessed with previous ones. And those colleagues who are having presently fascination with loss and damage fund, and the chair of Asia Pacific constituency in that is including China, India, and 54 or 56 Asian countries. It is not about climate justice. So therefore, it's not attribution or retribution. It's just one more window, and those of us who have followed the climate change history, since the first principle was adopted, every 10 years there has been a new fund, JEF, Adaptation Fund, GCF, and this one, every 10 years, once in a decade. And not in one instance, we have been able to successfully access their funds. इसकी तरह मैं थोड़ा सा और बाद में बात कर लूंगा, but I just want to give you one example on this. Pakistan lost, I think, how many billion in 2022 floods? 20 billion? Pardon? $20 billion? $30 billion? According to PDNA, the government of Pakistan's report. All international finance since 1992 is by all institutions is less than this amount. So even if Pakistan was successful in accessing climate finance globally, the total pot available for this kind of financing that we are hoping is so small that it cannot help you mitigate your loss from non-disaster. And this is very important. Instead of dotting lines, they have become extremely competitive. And there are several competitors in these windows. Countries compete against each other. Pakistani application will be competing with Bangladesh or Malawi or Zambia or whatever. Not just that. Sectors, agriculture, energy versus urban planning, urban something else. And a sovereign like Pakistan versus accredited agencies like UNEP, like WHO, like UNDP, we compete with them. So even if we were to apply it's not like getting a donor's assistance. You're sitting on your desk and somebody will fill the application for you. This will require a lot of struggle, a lot of international knowledge, a lot of running around, because you need to know against whom you're competing. My application for flooding will be competing against Philippines, against hurricane. Think that way. And all, I'm losing my slides, but doesn't matter. But last point, which I think was supposed to come on in a subsequent slide, but I can share that with you. And that's also a very important point. They're not only competitive, they're not only in competition with UNDP by way of example, because they have accreditation and we don't. And when you don't have accreditation, you depend on those who have the accreditation. And these intermediary organizations, they'll go and get financing on your behalf. And when they go to get financing on your behalf, they'll make a multi-country project, 3, 4, 5, 7 countries in 1 or 2 continents. And even if it's a $500 or $700 million project, the share of per country will be less than 50 million over 5-year time. So even if we succeed through securing projects through intermediaries, and the examples of Pakistani project are exact. You saw the figures, you forget that there was a 6-country project spread over 5 years, and Pakistani share was not even $30 million spread over 4 years. So intermediaries financing is a joke compared to our needs. I'm not questioning their sincerity or whatever. Now, this intermediary dependent is the first column. These are the funds that came every 10 years. And Pakistan's track record on that is pretty bad. I just want to give you one of the most favorite example of Pakistan is Jeff. It's the ice cream flavor in the country. Everybody's trying to access Jeff, GCF. 10 years ago, I wrote a policy brief for Government of Pakistan. At that time, GCF envisioned the disbursement was $100 billion a year. It has never reached that level yet. $1 billion, $10 billion, $100 billion a year. That the fund design. And the policy brief said that if Pakistan strives or plan to get 1% of that fund, it will be $1 billion a year. And if you have 3 or 4 projects in year 4, you will have a portfolio of $4 billion. Imagine. And we don't have the capacity to write a $50 million proposal. मैं हवाई बात कर रहा था, ड्रीम शेप कर रहा था, कैपेसिटी बिल्ड करने के जर्नी की बात कर रहा था. I want to challenge you here. The only proposal that was written by Government of Pakistan was less than $5 million. It was written for RED program by Ministry of Climate Change. You were working at the ministry at the time. If I'm not mistaken, that's the only time Government of Pakistan actually wrote proposal. Otherwise, you depend on consultants, you depend on UNDP or World Bank or others. So GCF में Pakistan का share जो है, it's smaller than Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan is slightly bigger than Islamabad, let alone Karachi or Punjab or so. There's another category. All these funds will require accreditation. And we have not secured accreditation. And we're not likely to secure accreditation. There are many reasons. So I think in the next 3, 4, 5 years, Pakistan will not be able to secure accreditation. And therefore, our direct access will always be weak and we'll be getting financing if we do through accredited agencies like UNDP or others. एक कैटेगरी और है, उसकी तरफ मैं आपकी तवज्जो दिलाने से पहले मैं दूसरे कॉलम पे जाता हूँ, नीचे आने से पहले. MDBs, multilateral development, have more than 20 or 30 specialized climate change windows. They don't have national portfolios alone. They have multiple trust funds and multiple climate change related windows. And I just listed half a dozen there. Each one of them may be $700 million. Each one of them could give you 50, 70, 100, $200 million type of project to a sovereign country like Pakistan if you apply and if you engage with them. if you write your own proposal, if you know what you want to do, right? And that is in competition with UNFCCC. They are also Paris Agreement compliant. These are supposed to be grants, increasingly less so. And there we need to work on the proposals. I want to come to the last one, and that is my new favorite. In last a few years, at every COP, the presidency of the COP announces a dozen plus initiatives. Most of those initiatives are backed by financial pledges. कोई forestry पे करेगा, कोई energy पे करेगा, कोई किसी चीज पे करेगा. And those dozen or so, UK जब Glasgow में हुआ, so they had 19 public and private sector initiatives that they announced. Dubai announced more than 12 or 15. Russell, Shams क्या था वो? The one in Jordan, in Egypt, sorry, Sharm el-Sheikh. Sharm el-Sheikh had more than a dozen. And those are very interesting things. We need to understand that, because that's a low-lying fruit. That sovereign that hosts it want to strengthen its economy and leadership in the global marketplace, at least global marketplace. So the big themes that are important for them and their economy, such as biodiversity or health or vaccination or climate or urban planning or disaster preparedness, whatever, renewable energy, solar, wind, they announce those. They're backed by that solar. We have never shown our interest in these windows. I just want to give you one example, just one. UK government, together with French and other governments, announced one initiative called energy transition. Now, this is not grants. This is not concessional loans. This is market loan. In most instances, there may be grants on energy transition ki baat kar raha hu because that's your field. That has committed $10 billion to South Africa to phase out of coal. It has committed $8 billion to Indonesia to phase out coal. It has phased out your favorite country, Vietnam, I think $11 billion to phase out of coal. In other words, if you engage with an initiative like this, you can get mega funds, and those mega funds will be loans, just the way the loans are from MDBs, IMF or IFC or others, but they can be much more focused to help you accomplish something. And my own vision is that if Pakistan announces net zero emissions target, we need a new narrative and access those people. We can come out of this 200, 300, 400 billion rupees annual bleeding from our circular debt and other energy deficit that we're facing. That's the solution in climate change initiatives that I mentioned. Quickly on two slides I'll more show, otherwise it will get very complicated. The next diagram. Now, not just that. Many countries have their bilateral windows, and those windows are bigger than GCF or loss and damage and other funds. UK government's window, I don't know if it's given here or not. It is also called ICF, International Climate Finance. It is Swans G. It has a commitment of, I don't know, $12 billion pounds or something, $80 billion. Imagine, look at the magnitude. But think of their economy. And all these are very, very competitive. It's not that they'll come to you and say, here's the money. And then it doesn't stop there. Then there are hosts of organizations, and these I have taken from a study I did for GIZ some years ago. And there are a lot of non-governmental organizations where smaller souls like your institution and mine can go and bid. I want to wrap up more or less here. I've taken a slide or the This is my last slide. If you allow me, I can spend a minute or two explaining to you. जो मैंने पहली स्लाइड आपको दिखाई थी, जिसमें हम सेठ की तरह मेज के पीछे बैठे हैं कि कोई हमें पैसे ला के देगा, हमारी प्रपोजल बनाएगा, समथिंग लाइक दैट. We have not come out of that. We need to be slim, smart, running, having the ability to write our own proposals, define our own priorities. There's one thing in the world that cannot be outsourced, everything else can be. You cannot outsource thinking. When you outsource thinking, तो जी हमारे लिए खुद ही priority determine करो और funding लेकर आओ, so then it becomes a very messy situation. So Pakistan is still in that mode where we have outsourced thinking. It is on the donors who wish to fund us to think what we need, develop something and come to us. And governance is so weak, people don't like what I'm going to say. Pakistan's accreditation has not been serious from GCF. And a little bit that we tried to, that was elite capture. A very credible organization or bank or whatever, very credible of them, they were secured in the smaller or medium-sized projects only because they were known to the government officials to build them. And that's all they need to capture. And many years down the road, they have not submitted one proposal. Let alone securing another. Some donors have progressed further. They are having special purpose vehicles. If you need for energy startups in net zero emissions, if you need something on urban planning or solid waste management or clean drinking water or something, they set up funds. And I think in Pakistan, there are many. UK government, several, I think a few initiatives in that domain. The mega structure तो ठीक होता कि नहीं होता, इनको 500 रुपए दे दो, जाओ गली साफ कर दो, at least to that extent, and they are quite effective actually. That's a very important track. Some international institutions have also got accreditation. WWF has just secured, just about a year ago, secured a $70 million project from GCF that was shown in the first presentation. And that is no credit to government, except that they signed it. And my friend Fawad, we have worked together for many years, will bear me on this. हमारा credit सिर्फ इतना कि हमने sign कर दिया, बड़े आसान के साथ किया, and it took a lot of time, lot of years. The same project would have been signed probably 2 years ago, had we signed in time in terms of fund support. And then somebody told them that there's a lot of money out there. So instead of having a clear focal point to go and access on our behalf, every ministry and department and every province is trying to set up its own climate change fund and its own climate change unit and its own climate change cell. And they are going to different donors secretly from each other to get a small grant, to get a project for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, or to hire 2, 3, 4, 5 people to start something. All of that will be more like 1950s when somebody asked about the Islamic bloc and there was a very strong thought, 0 + 0 + 0 will be a 0. Is that right? We heard that in 50s, I think. So these smaller islands, unless they are connected with each other to create some synergy and give us a direction which way to go, they will fizzle out at this project's support from a particular donor comes to a closure. So I'm not giving you a very rosy picture, but what I've tried to do is share with you my understanding of the complexity that presently exists in this domain. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. We have Mr. Farooq online. I'd request that we take Mr. Farooq online.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Farooq online from video call, please. Mr. Farooq, if I could request you to share your experience.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? So,
Yes, we can, sir.
oh, that's good. Thank you. first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I think after the one presentation that I have seen from one Mr. Davar and what Ali has said, I think you've actually taken my thunder out of my statement or my remarks that I could have added anything. But let me just add a few points from my side to the primary point that we should understand, and I want to limit our conversation not to just climate finance, but to a larger perspective. But before that, please understand, as somebody who negotiated Green Climate Fund, there has never been an understanding of any nature that there will ever be a fund of $100 billion. I don't know why we believe that there was such an understanding. There has never been. GCF channels about 1.5 to 2 billion per year, and it might increase its portfolio of projects. But that is where it is. It gets pledges for its one replenishment period for about 10 or $12 billion. That is the fund level. And I think what Tawqir Ali very clearly said, for us to think that we can continue to seek money from outside for the problems that we face and the problem that we should solve, that's a fallacy. We have to invest. There are a few investments that I believe we need to make and make very clearly. One, we should invest in a strategic approach. Our narrative of being a victim of climate change has its limits, because on a number of occasions we have proven that half of the problem result from our governance issues. The same hotel in Swat has been demolished by floods for roughly 3-4 times. Why do we build that hotel there? We have governance issues that we need to address. The second point is we need to invest ourselves in our climate challenge. Our budgetary coordination and linkages between our budgets and the link with climate change is very minimal. And I think in recent years, since everyone is now looking for climate finance, and there seems to be a view that there is, the money is there and we are not accessing it probably. I do agree to that to a certain extent, but you can only access not only after making some bankable project, but also if you are also investing yourself. To expect that the international community should come and take over your responsibility is again another fallacy. So the first point was to invest in strategic approach, remove the victimhood narrative. The second is to invest in yourself. The third point I want to make is a bit more challenging. We need to invest in regional cooperation. Situation in Lahore or wider climate challenges cannot be addressed without regional cooperation. Something that we are seriously lagging. I will leave it at that, but maybe during discussions we can address them. So the fourth point I want to tell you is we need to invest in our civil society and our private sector. It is again a fallacy to assume that the governments should be able to attract climate finance. The word by this time has changed considerably. For example, all these investment opportunities that Ali highlighted in his last statement about whatever happens at the end of the COPs. Have we mobilized our private sector? Have we integrated those people who actually take decisions about the carbon footprinting? We need to invest in, for example, in our real estate sector. There should be carbon footprinting of real estate sector, of our banking, of transportation sector, of our cement. We need to build these coalitions, bring them forward to actually take the climate challenge. It is not sufficient for us to sit in one ministry or the other and think that we can solve climate challenge. That is, again, in my view, another fallacy. And the final thing that I would like to mention is that we need to invest in rules, regulations, governance issues. I give you one example, and I hope there are many civil servants here. We have no idea, or maybe a very faint idea, what is the difference between an NOC, an endorsement, or an approval. They are run through the same process. As a result, if a private sector comes to seek an NOC from one of the ministries, it takes months, perhaps years. We need to define these rules to enable the private sector to be able to access financing from outside of whatever could be made available to Pakistan. My final point here, again, sorry, I said there was a final point earlier, that please be clear, there are limits to international financing. We cannot expect Pakistan's hit, as somebody just said, was $20 billion. Do you seriously expect that somebody will come and give us $20 billion out of climate finance? The whole pot is not even that large. Unless we don't invest ourselves, bring us to a level where we can address the challenge, the international community will watch us from a distance. And I hope that we can also remove that fallacy. Happy to engage in any conversation that you would like to steer from here onwards. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We've had the panelists speak very pertinent points. I'm just going to bring on a few points that have been discussed for discussion. I'm sorry, we're so used to calling you ATS that that's what comes to mind. Ali Saab has brought on very pertinent points. It's the thought process that has to change. We need to start thinking for ourselves. Farooq Saab also said the same thing. We need to embed within our planning and thought process now the ideas of climate resilience, sustainable development, and then tap to the climate finance side. The funds are available, we just don't tap them. One of them that I would like to bring on from both panelists also and Farooq Saab is the idea of the enabling environment, the compliance to the international funds. And then as Ali Saab also said, there is more than GCF. We've been so concentrated and obsessed around GCF. There's also private sector climate financing now. There are private sector investments where the carbon market link is now coming in. That is another thing that I would like. And lastly, how do we present the enabling environment within Pakistan? The governance issues are there, but we also need to bring around some sort of mechanism in place where climate financing can be prioritized as a specialized subject. We create the environment for financing where we can attract private investment. We've already lost on the bandwagon where renewables was concerned because we're a middle country. We can no longer get climate financing because the credits are no longer available for the middle country where the grid renewables are concerned. We've lost that window, right? If we don't jump the energy transition soon, we lose the window for distributed generation small projects also. Because unfortunately, even though our infrastructure is an LDC, we are categorized as a income country. We've lost the national grid projects for renewables. We're slow on the transition, energy transition. Most countries are already heading, as Amitabh said, 80 billion. Already 35 billion have been committed for East African countries, and even South Africa, Ghana, countries like that have already capitalized on these. We're slow on the market. We're still trying to understand and grapple with the idea of what net zero is. We don't have an emissions accounting in place for the GHG, which actually will help you to the transition. So all of these structures form your enabling environment, which is what we fall short of. Lastly, how do we build across our planning, and not just for Ministry of Climate Change, but for every ministry, every policy that is going to go forward? How do we build the idea of climate resilience and sustainable climate resilience that will give us sort of the avenue to tap climate finance? Just leave these two thoughts for the panel.
Thank you, Assalamu alaikum. I think quite enough has been said by Sheikh Saab and then Farooq as well. I think two things here I'd like to mention. One, when you say that we need to invest in governance and other stuff, I think the first thing we need to get out of it is the notion, what is in it for me? Anything where our skin is not involved, we don't really care whether it's an NOC or any other stuff. Take some mentions, project would have been signed 2 years early. I completely agree. It took them about 5 years just to get the objection from the DCF board, which technically you're supposed to meet every 6 months, and is sort of a facilitation body. But except for the facilitation, the rest is there. So that's how we treat our grant. When we talk about numbers, whether that be in losses or billions or whatever we expect from anybody, we don't really compare that even to our GDP. I mean, the simplest is just compare those numbers to the IMF programs, and then you realize the significance of numbers we're talking about. And is it this easy that we can bring those numbers in? And third, and my last point for now, is the judicious use of money, whatever we have. Our spread is increasing with our increasing disasters. Our requirement for money to cope up to that is increasing, and yet we're not judiciously using our resources, whatever we have. What to talk about the fact that what is our absorption capacity and what is our implementation capacity? Even the money which we've received over the years, I don't recall completing a single project in the given time space within the money allocated. That's where we are. And the only thing which remains consistent in the entire stuff is change of management, change of people, everything. But the only thing which is not increasing or improving is the word resilience, which is the topic of the day. Let's stop like this.
It's also grim. Well, of course, it's not a good news. A mood question for us, given what we are, and I can give one more graphic example so that it sticks in your mind. I see many younger people, and I want to address them for a moment. When on the traffic light somebody comes and asks me for money, We say he's able-bodied, he doesn't deserve. We roll up the window. Or we say it's connected with the mafia, it's corruption, it's connected somewhere else. We roll up our window. Or we say he's able-bodied, he doesn't deserve. So kindly think that in the global traffic light, climate finance, somebody is riding that car, or in a car, driving, and we are able-bodied, corrupt, unappealing people who are extending the hand that we need support. And the world is right to roll up the windows. This is as graphic as I can make it. But at 60 something, I want, as you said, some mood shifting. And I want to build upon Farooq's point. And that is true sense of optimism. Where is our equity? If we say somebody thinks about us and writes a proposal, that's not fair. And we say 100% finance should come up from outside, that's not fair either. And if our priorities are not right, I widen my, what do you call, motorways, and don't give access to the poor neighborhoods, that's not fair either. So we need to get our priorities right. But then on the ground, it is really inspirational to see that how people, despite extremely limited resources and extremely limited scientific base for their decision making, how well-informed decisions are trying to make to turn around their lives and livelihoods, to protect themselves from the lives, the challenges of climate change. And really the country is plotted from the seawater intrusion in the coastal belt of Pakistan to the receding glaciers. Many of us may have traveled, but see how autonomous adaptation is creating space for itself. Autonomous adaptation is IPCC, which says when it's not centrally planned or decided by policymaker or decision maker, people or local governments take their own decisions in the best faith, the best they can do. And that is called autonomous because it's not managed elsewhere. And this is not always a very healthy thing to do. For example, migrating out is autonomous migration strategy, autonomous adaptation strategy. But then it also gives you unplanned urban growth. It may be fine for me and my family to leave a neighborhood if I'm not safe and secure there, or the natural resource base has shrunk, groundwater has depleted or become more polluted. The soil has lost its productivity and fertility. And if I cannot attract the government investment to have school, hospitals, roads, and access to the marketplace, I'm well within my right to go and stay. It's my adaptation strategy to take my family where we feel safe. But what happens instead, when we in areas, the place that we find is perhaps even more unsafe. There are low-lying areas, they are flood-prone, congestion, there's pollution, there's something. And yet, even in those communities, we see many civil society groups work. Many entrepreneurs make their livelihood out of that. Many banks do their lending. Private sector really comes in there. And increasingly, we see that people are adapting to new technologies and new modes of livelihood. So, situation may be bad at the macro level because climate change is not federal government subject to begin with. Climate change belongs where the vulnerability is. And vulnerability is at the communities level, where we don't have a local government to look after that. So there's some moving around of puzzles that we have to do to figure out. I just want to conclude by giving you one example. Our trick is to see how climate change is linked with real life. The IMF and the World Bank and everybody is telling you that the federal government is doing several functions that should be done by the provinces. And one of the reasons for your financial deficit is that you have taken too much. There are many things that belongs to provinces, they should be doing, good or bad. And if you do that, your deficit can come down. Technically, legally, this will be correct. But historically, that's not the way it is. Now, if the federal government after 2020 floods says that we want to help the flood victims and starts disposing of, doling out money, it was not its function. It's added to its deficit. And if it's stopped down, it cannot be very productive. So the climate finance, when you give to somebody 5,000 rupees or 7,000 rupees, instead of paying insurance to the infrastructure that you have, none of the public sector buildings are insured. Be it roads, be it whatever infrastructure we have, power grids, power stations, and so on and so forth. So when we lose them, we lost $9 billion worth of infrastructure, public sector infrastructure. None of that was insured. The instruments are available for insurance. So instead of giving money doling out to as a policy instrument, we can see that there are many options available. We learn from the communities, we learn from the world, and I think there are many, many ways for us to turn around. Thank you.
What Ali Saab said and you said reminded me something. A UNSSC climate adaptation conference, and the first thing we were taught was the nature of man is to adapt, so it is resilient. So communities will automatically adapt to changes, rightly said. But we have also seen that when we have top-down approaches, and that is what we've had so far, the top-down approaches are no longer going to work because you're talking about community level. Climate vulnerability is now community-based issue, and you're talking about those areas which are more vulnerable to risk in climate, which we already have outlined. The finances have to trickle down to these communities. And so, I mean, we are talking about a country which has very unique ecosystems at every part of it. And this is something I was taught by you. I mean, Balochistan alone has 7 ecosystems. Punjab has its own ecosystems. The North has, again, 5 different ecosystems. Each ecosystem has its own challenges and its own need for structures. And because we've had thinkers who've come from abroad and given us plans, we've sort of given one fit all plan. And it is time now for us to start thinking on what our needs at the bottom up approaches. I'm going to start, yes, I'm going to ask you to start on this.
Come in on that. Since the organization I represent today and I work at the National Disaster Risk Management Fund, just to give one point of positivity as well. I mean, whatever we see, what is lost is something which was not secure. Because obviously whatever was saved would never be as part of the news. Because as a normal citizen, when you leave your house, if you don't see garbage, you're okay. If the traffic light is functioning fine, you're okay. If you reach wherever you're going and the road was okay, everything is fine. It's not part of the news. So the government is doing something. Otherwise, the losses would have increased. Even the Balochistan floods would have had havoc more than whatever they have done now. I'll give a small example of NDRMF's interventions when it comes to communities. For instance, we do retrofitting of buildings. So we did retrofitting of buildings for girls' school, and I'll give just one example of Bamburit, the Kalash. We put an early warning system there, GSM based. We did the retrofitting of buildings. We put a safe place there as part of an early warning system, and people to be rescued and to be saved at that particular place. Now, Kalash saw, as part of the floods, sweep away the entire FC checkpost in the same place. And after these small interventions and building the capacities of the communities, this time around, there was not even a single casualty in the entire region. So that's how you build communities, and that's how you build their resilience. We are done with our first batch of flood protection and other projects at NDRMF. And as internally, this has been decided that any intervention, any financing which we will be undertaking in the future will be secured by default. We cannot really afford to spend money on the same structure twice, just because it was swept away because of floods. Its core purpose of financing is to protect that particular thing. So this will be coming in as financing. Another thing which we're coming up, as Sheikh Sahab also mentioned, is the disaster risk financing, which we're undertaking. So the risk financing, I mean, he did mention the fund flows, cash flow transfers that amounted to $300 million. That amount had to be given only because of the fact we did not have a risk financing instrument in place earlier. Until the time we have such instruments in place, we will continue to take out money from the PSDP and other places just to give them to cash flows or other sorts for that matter. The governance has to be implemented rightly. Farooq rightly mentioned I think it was the Honeymoon Hotel, which was built thrice on the same place, washed away at the same place. Still, we don't learn. I wonder what incentive did the owner have in building it at the same time. But these are things where you need to start streamlining the policy, which I think is there, but is still at a very slow pace. Thank you.
बाकी बातें तो एक तरफ है ना, ये हनीमून होटल 3 दफा बना, दोबारा बन गया। अच्छा, मुझे याद है मैंने हमारे पिछले चीफ ऑफ आर्मी स्टाफ थे, उनकी स्टेटमेंट थी कि हम किसी को गिविंग और वॉलेट नहीं करने देंगे, ऐसी जगह पर नहीं बनाएंगे। as powerful is as you get, and all of us saw. अरे जब वो बन जाता है, खुदा ना खासा दोबारा गिरे ना गिरे, आई डोंट नो, ठीक है ना जी, मगर वो पाकिस्तान को बड़ा रेपुटेशनल डैमेज देता है। जब आप जाके किसी से कहते हैं कि जी मैं कोरिया गवर्नमेंट के साथ नेगोशिएट करने पहुंचा हूँ, $85 मिलियन की उनकी कोई इन्वेस्टमेंट है, तो कहते हैं यार वो तो आप बार बार वो इसी चीज़ पे बनाते हैं, क्या करते हैं, तो हम आपके साथ क्या करें। तो एक बंदे ने अपनी लाइवलीहुड के चक्कर, गवर्नेंस हमारी वीक है, ये ठीक है, उसको रोकने की कोशिश करेगा तो शायद वो असिस्टेंट कमिश्नर के सामने गंद लेकर आ जाएंगे। It's quite possible, and it has happened in the same area. When she tried to enforce the existing laws, the interest groups will come and say, तुम कौन होते हो, तुम अपने डिप्टी कमिश्नर को लेकर आओ। तो डिप्टी कमिश्नर वहीं से छुट्टी की भेज के कमिश्नर को लिख देगा कि मैं नहीं वहां पे जा सकता, मेरी पोस्टिंग अप कर दें। दूध कहाँ से आएगा, उनकी लाइवलीहुड कहाँ से आएगी। Look at the competition between two different needs. The need that I have for better wants more time, more resources, and it's probably for another generation, another planet. And people who are displaced, it has happened in Sindh this time. It has happened in Balochistan. They are in destitute. They want something today. And we cannot give them better. In fact, we cannot even give them the same. So the gap between building back better and resilience is tremendously huge. Our governments, this or the previous one, or maybe the future one, are not coming to grips with this thing. And in order to conclude, because एक माई का सखर एयरपोर्ट पे कुछ चीज गुम हो गई, तो गाड़ी वहां पे चलने लगी, तो गार्ड जो झंडी हलाता है, तो उसने कहा माई की कुछ चीज गुम गई, मैं उसको 1-2 मिनट एक्स्ट्रा दे देता हूँ कि ये ढूंढ ले। तो काफी ढूंढती रही, तो उसको वो नहीं मिली। तो गार्ड उसके पास गया कि अम्मा क्या हुआ? कहती है बेटा मेरा रुपया डेग पे। तो कहते लो मैं हेल्प करता हूँ, कितने करके गिरिया सीगा, कहते मुल्तान के स्टेशन थे। तो हम पाकिस्तान वाले सखर के स्टेशन पे वो रुपया ढूंढ रहे हैं जो मुल्तान के स्टेशन पे गिरा था। Our vulnerability is at the local government level. Solution we are trying to find is at the federal level. Please remember that. रुपया आपका मुल्तान स्टेशन पे गिरा था, इस्लामाबाद में नहीं गिरा था। आपकी वल्नरेबिलिटी पाकिस्तान के 40, 50, 60 डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में है। वहां पे लोकल गवर्नमेंट चाहिए, वहां पे कंस्ट्रक्शन स्टैंडर्ड चाहिए, वहां पे रेजिलियंस के स्टैंडर्ड चाहिए, वहां लोकल गवर्नमेंट चाहिए। तो ये जो मिसमैच है, इट्स कॉस्टिंग अस अ लॉट। आप यकीन कीजिए, इस मीटिंग में आने से पहले मैं किसी ऐसी मीटिंग में आया, वहां पे 1 बिलियन डॉलर 2 फेजेस में प्रोजेक्ट था। एवरीथिंग फॉर इस्लामाबाद। एंड गवर्नमेंट के साथ जो मैसेज लेकर आ रहे थे वो ये थे जल्दी करें। और मैं देख के उनको मैंने कहा भी वेयर आर द प्रोविंसेस, वेयर आर द लोकल गवर्नमेंट इंस्टीट्यूशन और ऑल दैट। उनका वो काम नहीं, वो तो हमारा काम था ना। सो सॉरी, मैं एक ऐसी चीज की तरफ आपकी टेंशन दिला रहा हूँ कि हमारी टोटल लोगों की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी देखें, वेयर इज द वल्नरेबिलिटी एंड वेयर आर द इन्वेस्टमेंट्स। बहुत बड़ा गैप हमने क्रिएट कर दिया।
Farooq sir.
Gee, thank you. Can you hear me all? Again? Yes. Okay.
I think we've reached our time limit for the conference. I'm going to thank everybody who was part of it. I'm just going to conclude that resilience is going to come bottom up. And we're not going to have one solution fits all. The nature of our country is such that we need to find the solutions that are unique to each area. I'm just going to also add that we also need to start looking, when we talk about climate financing for resilience, we also need to first look at what resilience means internally before we start looking at climate financing externally. With that, I would like to thank everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we'll have to move the Q&A session to tea in the lobby. But before we do so, I would just request President IRS Ambassador Johar Salim to please give us his concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Distinguished guests. It was a very exciting discussion. And I think the purpose of this discussion was the symposium to bust some myths which we have in the area of climate finance. I just have a very small anecdote. In 2022, you would all recall, we had those devastating floods when almost half of the country, or probably more than that, was inundated. And the losses were estimated at $30 billion or more. So we made an appeal to the world. And a lot of countries, presidents of major countries such as the UK and France, Prime Minister of UK and President of France, and the heads of states and governments of not only countries from Europe, from many other parts of the world, they showed us the full cooperation in terms of collecting the support that Pakistan needed at the time. So we all thought that, First, we were thinking of having a conference, a donors conference. And France, at one point, they offered, President Macron actually offered that he would have that. Subsequently, that conference was not held independently, but was rather merged with another event. I think it was the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, where it was finally held parallel to the events. And there were a lot of pledges which were announced with a lot of fanfare in Pakistan. It reached $5 billion, $6 billion, $8 billion. And everybody was so happy in Pakistan that, like, so much money is going to come and we're going to have, this quest for resilience. We will build back better. And by the way, Sheikh Sabi, this build back better is not our slogan. This we basically stole from the United Nations. But I was not very sanguine because I've had an experience a long time ago when I used to be Director General for Europe. At that time, you'd recall, we had that devastating earthquake. And after the earthquake, forum was set up, Friends of Democratic Pakistan. And there were pledges of billions of dollars in those years. But out of all those pledges, of I think about $6 billion of pledges were made then. Pakistan only got a few $100 million at the end of it, So my impression was, and this is what I told the policymakers this time as well, politicians, that look, these pledges don't really count on these pledges because at the end of the day, many of these pledges don't materialize. And now recently when I've checked, out of those pledges that we had after the floods in 2022, how much money has been actually realized? And again, unfortunately, I found out there was again a few $100 million. So the point here is that unfortunately we have this, it's very fashionable in Pakistan. First of all, to look outside Pakistan, always. And then, just keep on exaggerating our expectations to the point where, we were always looking for a Messiah, and for us, the Messiah is going to be out of Pakistan. And suddenly we'll get all those billions of dollars of, or tens of billions of dollars of funds or investment water. But things in the real world don't really happen in that way. And my purpose for having this symposium was to have all these experts and come up with a realistic expectation of what type of climate finance is available in the world. And out of the finance which is available, what is accessible, And out of that which is accessible, what are we capable of getting? Because, the problem is, it has been mentioned very clearly, that there are lots of problems at our end as well. I was Pakistan's ambassador to Germany, and in that capacity, I was representing Pakistan in the UNFCCC. And I can share you with my esteemed panel and the distinguished guests here, that this myth, which Farooq talked about as well, this $100 billion GCF fund, this is not a myth which was created by anybody, just out of that forum. In that particular forum, they used to make speeches and they used to quote that $100 billion fund. And I remember once I asked a question as well. I said, where is that $100 billion? Because a lot of countries, developing countries, haven't got anything out of it. And then they try to explain it one way or the other. But then some official, in private, he mentioned to me that all this money is basically the development cooperation which these countries have already pledged to developing countries, and now is being repackaged. So the money is not there. The money has already been pledged one way or the other. it was development cooperation money, but now it has been just repackaged or relabeled. So internationally, when we talk about climate finance, a lot of these things happen. I was there in Rio in 1992 when this Earth Summit took place. And I remember how big the agenda was and how vast the array of expectations was there. And how many years have passed since then? We are in 2024 now, more than 30 years. And what has actually happened? We all know how much climate funding has actually been passed to developing countries. I was there again in Sharm el-Sheikh when Pakistan negotiated, like as head of G77. And there was a huge celebration in Pakistan after that. There was a ceremony at the Prime Minister's office because, okay, that was a milestone, a major achievement. But at the end of the day, then in the next COP, there was an operationalization of that fund. And now finally, the COP, which is we're going to have in November in Baku, we'll see what comes out of it. But the fact is that out of all those mechanisms, we could have high hopes, but in actual terms, very little money is going to come to Pakistan. Eventually, we'll have to count on our own will and resources. And within that area, I think the biggest factor, which we probably didn't talk about, is that when we were young, Pakistan's population, I'm talking about what was West Pakistan then, was 60 million. Germany had greater population than Pakistan in those days. Germany is a more populous country. Today, Pakistan is 24 million, 240 million, and Germany is still 80 million. Ukraine had the same population as Pakistan at one point. Can we all understand the magnitude of the challenge we face when you have 4 times the population? So whatever burden that is putting on your resources, whatever burden, for instance, on the water availability, like all this housing, this deforestation that is taking place. Now we see the cities have enlarged to a point that, literally we have eaten up a bit of a big chunk of our arable lands as well. So I think the biggest challenge for, in terms of climate resilience is first of all, perhaps to control our population. If we don't do that, everything else will fail. The other points our experts mentioned here today are very important. I think governance is very important. The fact that the federal government has, we have had the devolution, we had after the 18th Amendment, we know where the provinces are, where the federation is. So how do we make the system work? There are different tiers. These challenges have to be addressed. And then we have to understand, like it has been said very eloquently and very amply, that the climate resilience starts at the grassroots level. And it is a culture more than anything else. It is a culture that we need to promote, first and foremost. So these are all these are all ideas, like which have come out of this symposium. And I'm very happy, very much appreciate, the time and the effort made by our panelists and also particularly Farooq Khan, a dear friend. And I'm telling you, like Farooq Khan and Ali Tawqeed Saab and all these are experts. But if you could see they're echoing each other's views, and they're right. I mean, like all these this whole facade that we've created of like suddenly the country getting perhaps tens of billions of dollars of climate financing, which would help the country, develop, perhaps not just in the area of climate change, but holistically. I think that we really have to get out of that. We have to live in reality, and we have to, we have to work on the areas which are essential. Some of those areas they have mentioned, a couple I have mentioned as well, and then come up with a strategy which is befitting the state of our country and our existence. Thank you all for coming. Such a pleasure. And we could invite you now to have some tea with us. Thank you. We could have a photo.